Well, good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar, and we're going to wait just a minute or two before we get going. We should have music right now. Does somebody want to sing?
Yeah, I was gonna say you can sing.
No, you don't want me to sing. No. That would be bad. Those of you who are joining us will be starting in about 30 seconds. All right, I think we're ready to going. So good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the third of our series on growth during crisis. When we came together, we actually were talking about what we wanted to cover during this webinar series, and it seems like we have growth during crisis. Sounds like it's some sort of a sales process, but it's not. What we really want to do is kind of give you some tools and some ideas for ways for you to go ahead and allow your business to grow during this pandemic and as we move into the next phase and the future phases of this time. So I'd like to start by introducing the presenters. My name is Julie Marquis with Key Process Innovations. And we have Don Beelan from Perkins & Company. Don actually did his webinar 2 weeks ago. And if you didn't have a chance to see that, it is available online, I believe, at Perkins & Company website. And then we also have Scott Phillips. He's a managing partner of True North Partners, and he's actually going to be presenting today on how to replan and re-prepare as we move into the next phase of this pandemic. So as I mentioned, this is the third of 3 webinars, and the first one, Don presented on how to prepare and plan and prepare, and how to kind of get your businesses ready as we started to move into a shutdown or slowdown of our businesses, and kind of how to respond and make sure that our businesses are healthy. Last week, I actually presented on ways for you to leverage some new opportunities, and those could be a different way for you to do business. It could be a way for you to maybe leverage your employees and their new engagement in their work, and also look at new ways to bring new offerings or new ways of doing business in this new reality that we face. And then today, Scott's going to talk about how to replan and re-prepare, and also be able to kind of talk about capturing the process that you went through in order to make sure that you are prepared in case this happens again. So why did we decide to do this webinar series? And we kind of talked about how when we went into this shutdown, we kind of felt a little bit like winter. Things felt dormant, and it was very, everything slowed down, and we had to kind of stop and reassess on what was going on. But we also knew that as we move from winter, we go into spring, and spring is a time for growth and renewal. And we wanted to give you some ideas and some tips on ways for you to be able to lead your company out of the crisis and emerge much stronger and ready for this new reality. And we felt like in order to do that, we needed to kind of answer some of these strategic questions that might have come up during this process, and just give you some ideas on ways to think through some of the challenges that you're facing. And we also want you to make sure you're minimizing your risks, and as I mentioned, leveraging any potential opportunities that might come up. And finally, our whole goal is to allow you to spring forward and emerge from this chaos into a stronger business with a new direction and a vitality that perhaps you didn't have prior to this time.
So I will take over, and thank you, Julie, very much for the introduction, and good afternoon to all of you as well. I'm glad that you've spent the time today to participate with us. I want to also thank both Don and Julie for the work that they've done and the joy of kind of working together with them on this project. It's been a lot of fun. As Julie mentioned, this is the third webinar in a series, Growing Through Crisis. Hopefully it's a thoughtful process for managing your business through chaos. We put together this model that you see on the screen, and there will be opportunities to ask questions later, and certainly any part of this model that we're going to talk about today we can address as well. But this model was constructed to look for areas of improvement and importance for kind of the pre-crisis, the mid-crisis, and then the post-crisis work that we find ourselves in today. Obviously, chaos is not fun. It's not necessarily expected. Maybe it should be expected, but it's not necessarily able to be seen in advance. And certainly with COVID-19, it kind of has just jumped into our world, and we've had to deal with it specifically in a crisis sort of timing and so forth. It happens to be augmented a little bit with the George Floyd travesty and the riots and chaos of looting and so forth as well. And all of those are putting pressure, even more pressure on businesses to succeed and to get back to kind of a normal sort of process looks a little bit more difficult to make happen. So we want to talk through these today with you a little bit, describe the model to you, and again, how we essentially think that it may be helpful for you to be thinking forward in terms of today, replanning and re-preparing for hopefully a normal sort of environment going forward. Phase one that Don presented 2 weeks ago was this plan and prepare and the respond piece. As you recall, if you can go back about 3 months ago, we all kind of went into this COVID-19 sort of crisis, and everybody went into planning mode. What do I do now? We had several clients who spent 2 to 3 weeks, literally day after day, sitting in conference rooms working on what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about that? Focusing on trying to manage all the details of dealing with the chaos that actually came as a result of that. Some were preparing to manage cash flow, immediate impacts of loss of revenue, loss of sales, loss of employees even, staying liquid from the standpoint of managing the cash flow, keeping customers, keeping day-to-day operations going. And so those were tremendously pressure-packed pieces. Well, we kind of moved after that first couple weeks into this second sort of phase of responding, and that whole idea that we have situational things that needed to be responded to, ways of making up losses or taking advantage of market opportunities, dealing with the immediate needs. And you can see some of the needs that are listed here. Employee safety, certainly that's become large and continues to be a focus of a lot of companies. Business finances, customer support, outreach, focus and simplicity. It was real easy to say, well, we're doing all these things, and in this crisis, it became a lot more, let's just get this thing working and kind of keep on track and make this happen. So simplicity became, I think, a key word in a lot of people's vernacular during that period. And then that whole sense of how do we maintain hope and courage in this time of craziness and chaos. And then last week we had the joy of hearing from Julie about leveraging new opportunities. When you finally let the dust settle a little bit and begin to look around and say, what are the things that we can actually take advantage of during this time? What are the ways that we can take advantage of the market opportunities and so forth? A lot of things came forward, and a lot of opportunities present themselves. Certainly, you look at the list here, ways to increase your efficiency, places for innovation. And again, this webinar is available to see the details, and it was actually really well done. So new products and services, minimizing risks, strengthening the team, expanding or contracting, new model. Lots of things to think about during that sort of next phase, that breath of fresh air, where we actually had a chance to say, what else is around that we can actually take advantage of? Well, today's webinar is a focus on steps to get ready for recovery. It's the replanning and re-preparing. And throughout the phases, continuing to remember that communications is critical, tracking and measuring is critical, and managing cash flow is absolutely crucial in this time as well, whether it's in phase 1, 2, or 3. The effort it takes to get back to normal, if you will, in my opinion, should be even greater than the first phase, the second phase. This getting back to normal really is, again, taking a look at how do I actually make this normal, healthy business happen again. So we're going to take some time talking about what are the process steps to make that possible. Well, where do we begin? We begin by assessing our current state, our current situation. And again, there was the assessment of kind of the how do we deal with COVID, the safety pieces, the employee safety pieces, and so forth. But this is actually looking at your business from a broader perspective, looking at it from a higher view, if you will. And it begins by really what I like to call defining what is here, what is happening in the here and now. So the first piece is looking at new external realities. What about the clients? Are they the same clients you had before, or are they all new clients, different kinds of clients? Is the marketplace different? Has it changed? Has it become something different than it was before? How about competitors? Have some disappeared? Are new ones coming to the forefront because they decided that their market they were in before isn't working, and now they are saying, hey, maybe this new place, which happens to be your marketplace, becomes a significant focus for them. Suppliers, Julie talked last week about the supply chain interruption and the difficulties with suppliers as it happens potentially. So that those external realities, documenting what those things are and what's working and what's not with regard to your current new external realities is a big piece as well. Next, looking at your internal realities. What worked well in the last 3 months? You've identified some key people that have done remarkable things, made some significant impacts, and actually maybe even identified some future leaders for your organization by what they've done. There are things that haven't worked so well, and we can make all kinds of examples of things that haven't worked so well. But again, documenting specifically what has worked, what hasn't worked, and then what are some of those things that actually continue to need improvements as you look forward or need to be reviewed more deeply would be another thing to look at there. Sometimes a good way to ask the question, which we use quite a bit, is what are the things, or what should we start doing, what should we stop doing, and what should we continue doing? I love that sort of framework, start, stop, and continue. Because the start things are things that actually are opportunities to increase and grow and move forward. The stop things are the things that aren't working that you can jettison and get out of the way. And then the continue things are those things that are working well. So really being clear about what does your here look like? Is it clearly articulated and identified? Another question we often ask in the assessment process is, if you had a magic wand, what would you wave and what would you change and what would that look like? And answers such as, I wish my customers would come back. That's a pretty good wish for a lot of people, especially right now. But if you can actually identify that one thing that's actually standing in the way of getting where you want to go, and you can solve that one thing, you can make some great steps towards recovery as well. At True North Partners, we do 15 to 20, 25 sort of assessments every year, and certainly identifying critical issues for organizations to get back to normal or to recover or to go where they want to go are steps that we take as well. And I know that both Don and Julie are good at that as well and would be helpful in that place. So after that, what is, once you've identified kind of the here and there, you've got a clear picture of where you are, where you want to go is the next step in that process. What is that future?
Can I
Yes.
can I interrupt you just momentarily? I just want to remind all the audience that if you have questions, we definitely want to answer them. And the way that you can submit your questions is down on there's a Q&A box. You can type that out. You can type it to just the panelists, or you can type your question to everybody that's actually on the webinar. But we've decided we're going to go through this whole presentation. At the end, we'll be asking questions. But I just want to make sure that you know how to submit those questions and make sure that we've got time to answer those at the end.
Thanks, Julie. And I'd also say that we're all three available for conversations with people afterward as well. So Absolutely. Feel free to make use of that as well. Thank you, Julie. Appreciate that. All right, thanks. So again, back to the second step, the second piece, if you have some clarity on what's working here and you want to get a clear picture of where you're going there, if you get the here and the there, then you can kind of figure out what's standing between here and there and fix that. And that's probably going to give you the best outcome in terms of the recovery process that you're going to be looking for. So making sure that your vision and your destination is still clear and hasn't changed is a real key piece in this process. We often talk about vision, and some people say, well, it's 20 years down the road or 15 years down the road. In my opinion, what we're talking about is somewhere more like 3 to 5 years, not very far out, something that's very actionable, something that you can actually deal with and make a difference with as you look forward. During COVID, during this crisis pandemic, some people's future looks very different. Some people actually have had some destination change. We had one company specifically that was planning on selling their business in the next 2 to 3 years. And they've actually readjusted that to be 5 to 7 years, simply to get the value of the business back to where it needs to be before they're ready to sell it. So again, making an adjustment, even in terms of what that future looks like, is a critical step in this process as well. Is that destination different? Some of those destination pieces might include simply getting your business recovered, improving your cash flow, making yourself healthy from a financial standpoint, maybe stabilizing the workforce. There are a lot of people that are just employees that are just scared to go back to work, afraid they're going to get COVID, for example. How do you stabilize the workforce? Another future vision might be, how do I grow? How do I get back my sales organization? How do I get more sales back in the bucket that has dried up in this time? Refocusing on distractions. I know that a lot of companies we work with have all kinds of things going on, and in this time it's somewhat of a piece of saying, how can I focus on few things that really matter? So what are those few things that make a difference going forward? Maybe there's new markets you want to serve. Maybe it's an opportunity to say, this is a chance to actually do some things different than we had done before. Possibly it's actually changing the size and scope of your company. Maybe it's shrinking it down, or it's maybe expanding in some new directions. It might be even thinking about different ways of methods of distribution to your clients, methods of getting the product to market, for example. A lot of people obviously couldn't deliver the way they did before, and so that makes a big difference. It may actually be vertical integration as well. Maybe there's a couple of steps where you can buy above you, your vendors that supply to you, your customers who receive from you. Maybe there's some ways to develop vertical integration. One of our clients is a restaurant, and restaurants have had devastation, just unbelievable. Fine dining restaurants, that basically closed for 2 or 3 months and changed their model even midstream to say, we're going to do takeout as much as they could. Some actually had some other thoughts about it, but thinking forward into recovery and what does that look like? Some of the models are going to change drastically. Our client specifically has remodeled their entire restaurant. They've restructured the process flow. They've re-engineered their menu. They've rethought really, how can we do all these things maybe at 60% of the same levels that we had before COVID, and they can actually do this now profitably. So rethinking things in terms of what does that future model, what does that future organization look like is really critical to think about, in this time of COVID. Once the vision is clarified, you get a clear picture of there, and you can get the clear picture of here. Again, the next step in this process is to determine what are the steps necessary to move things forward. So I would say now is the first time to actually say, what are the actions we're going to take? If you don't know where here is, you don't know where there is, you certainly don't know what's going to fix it. And so again, it might be now is the time that you can actually be thinking about your model and what changes. It may be that you go from wide and shallow to narrow and deep. Again, these strategic questions of what are we to the marketplace and where do we go from here is a really critical piece in this process. Interesting, one of our clients as well had in the service industry, had a centralized, fairly large call center prior to the pandemic. And during COVID, they were forced, like everybody else, to work from home. Well, you put it together a 100-seat call center and have to disperse it to 100 different homes. It's a crazy, crazy process. If you think about setting up phone systems, internet access, computer capabilities, system integration, and to do that within a couple of weeks is remarkable. I mean, I look at some of the things that happened and really, really fascinating. What's interesting though is before the COVID began, they had no desire to have a work from home model. And yet after this has happened, this whole idea of going back to work maybe is looking at that model and saying, well, maybe we should have some of it a work from home model anyway. So even through this process, things have changed to say, there may be a new model that makes some sense and some new plans that we need to take to make that possible. In their case, it does have some issues to resolve, still some things to fix and improve, but the benefits really are significant. One of the things that is a benefit is that it may in fact drop out an entire floor of rent by having them work at home. So there's some positive sort of things that come from that as well. Scheduling changes, reducing costs, some of those things. So strategies and plans, what new choices will get you to the new destination? How will you have to think differently or make major adjustments? What plans are necessary? I would say your plans don't need to be elaborate. Really the question is, what do you need to do? When do you need to do it? Who's responsible? And how will you get it done? We actually are, again, True North Partners are working on probably a dozen of these plans right now, just in terms of what are the steps necessary to get us to that recovery place, which is what we're trying to do. So that's the next piece in the puzzle. So what really is the question? I would say, again, this execution is the so what. If you can't execute, plans are kind of useless. You probably heard the George Patton quote, General Patton quote, a good plan violently executed right now is far better than a perfect plan executed next week. Execution is paramount to success. And so the question I would ask is, how do you actually ensure good quality, good execution? And the answer is right there on the page, with clarity and energy. It does take essentially those two things to make it work. There's an author that I really enjoy, Karen Martin. She wrote The Outstanding Organization and a follow-on book called Clarity First. And she says, ambiguity prevents organizations from operating with focus, discipline, and engagement. Let me say that again. Ambiguity prevents organizations from operating with focus, discipline, and engagement. And I would also say from recovering fully. And so to a great extent, the words here, the pieces here, are absolutely crucial to your success in achieving what you're trying to accomplish. And I think it begins with documentation. Document exactly what you want to achieve. The more clear it is, the more defined it is in every aspect of it, the better chance you have of successfully achieving those outcomes. Secondly, I think setting up progress meetings for updates on the actions you're taking, the steps you're taking and making is really critical in the process of recovery. Specifically, the question of scoreboard. Why do you have a scoreboard? The scoreboard is actually to determine how you're doing in the game. So you watch a basketball game, if you just have people going up and down and there's no scoreboard, you don't know if they're winning or losing. So it's pretty important that you have a scoreboard, and that is that frequent progress meetings with a scoreboard is a critical piece in that process. Execution, thirdly, is with good solid execution, is about rewarding performance, helping people to be recognized for the actions that they take and the outcomes that are given. I'll talk a little bit more about this in one of the slides coming up here in a second. And lastly, I'd say execute with positivity. Stay upbeat with your team. Your team will respond much more to a leader that provides hope and encouragement, and especially during this time, be a leader. Leadership specifically is about staying positive and energized in this process. So let me talk a little bit more about this tracking and measuring and adjusting. Two areas I want to really spend a little bit more time on is this tracking and measuring, and then supporting your team as well. There's a saying that what gets measured gets better. And tracking and measuring is the way to make that get better, get those things better. We've talked about measuring progress on plans and follow through in the action plans. There's other things that are listed here that you can also track as well that are, I think, really important in this time. You have to prioritize which of these are critical to your organization, and we can certainly help with that. But these are some of the things that I would also pay attention to. Cash flow, Don has done a tremendously great job in articulating the value of cash flow and the importance of cash flow in the first webinar. So I challenge you to look at that and kind of understand that a little bit more. Financials, customer reactions and satisfaction, employee morale, shareholder concerns. These are just some additional pieces that I think are critical in this process of tracking and measuring performance. All with the purpose of taking action. Again, when you see trends, you see changes or threats, determine the necessary actions that are needed and then adjust your plans as needed and make that happen. That will be critical to your future. And let me talk a little bit about supporting your team. Kind of the final piece today is a bit more on what it takes to support your team and actually yourself. Maybe you are an owner of a business, the leader of a business, the president, so forth. We think a lot about how do we take care of our people? How do we handle helping them feel good about life and being comfortable? We often forget about us, about ourselves, what that looks like and what does that feel like. I challenge you to get some rest and get some recovery as well from this process. The first thing in terms of replanning and repreparing is taking care of yourself as well. Recognize your people. Sometimes it's a personal note, just a scratched out note, says, wow, thanks for your hard work. Thanks for putting in the time, making that happen. It might be a recognition of performance within a group setting. That tends to be the best way to help people feel good about what they're doing is recognize them. If you haven't got an employee of the month or employee of the week, this is a good time to start one of those and again, recognize people for the things that they're doing. Second thing is to reward people, and certainly some of the places where people tend to reward people is with monetary benefits, bonuses or raises. If you're like many companies, cash is difficult, so that may not be necessarily a good way to deal with things today. But there are other ways to reward people, including bringing in lunches, snacks, sending things home with employees for the family, including masks or gloves or things that could be useful at the home. It may be setting aside a normal rule or guideline at the company. Maybe it's bringing kids to work or pets or allowing people to play music or eat at their desk. I don't know. It's just figure out what works for you in the sense of rewarding them and giving them a chance to say, wow, they really appreciate me during this time. I think that's a really critical aspect of supporting your team. Thirdly is to recharge. And one of the ways to recharge is to provide resources in terms of things that people can find useful. It might be special books that you've read or things that have given some clarity to you, make you feel better. It might be a podcast, might be even a webinar to say, hey, listen to some of these things and see if you can pick up some ideas here. But it also is probably more specifically getting away, downtime. I'm actually taking a long weekend for the first time in this COVID this weekend to get away in private, but with my wife and in a way to recharge. And I think it's really important that we do that. Some people, including us, had to let go of some significant vacation that has been planned. And so again, it's a great opportunity right now to support your team and yourself by taking a little bit of time, a little bit of long weekends. Maybe it's going home early, that type of thing, or going out of your office at your home early because most of us are working from home. So close the door, lock it up, and go home and spend time with your family. And again, the last thing is to reignite, remembering that culture is descending. It really starts at the top and it kind of rolls down. So how you operate at the top is going to be how everybody else responds as well. You can be the spark that ignites the team and continues to keep them positive and hopeful in this process. So that's the process in terms of replanning and repreparing. I want to just put one more little note in here specifically about memorializing your work. A final note, really kind of understanding this is unique. This has been a crazy, crazy period. but unfortunately, it may not be the last one. And I hate to even say it that way, but another pandemic, another disaster, another whatever can come. And the question is, are you going to be ready for the next one like this one? And so this type of situation likely will occur. The question is, can you prepare now for the future? And I would say there are a couple things to look for. Specifically, identify your winners, your key personnel in the organization, reliable folks you want to have on the planning or execution team. Let them know that they can be useful specifically in the future as well. Make sure that you take care of those folks. There are people that have just done remarkable things, and you want to make sure that you not only take care of them, but appreciate them and let them know how important they are to you. Second thing is to document your successes and failures. Not everything we've done is perfect. Not everything we do is perfect. But a lot of good things came out of this. Document the things that worked really well. Document the things that didn't work so well. Figure out how to fix them and make them right. But make sure you document them, and then make sure you know where you put the slip of paper that you said, this is what worked. Because when you come to a new crisis, you need to be able to find that and pull it out. It's a little bit like in your phone system, you have the in case of emergency ICE. Maybe this is in case of pandemic or in case of emergency. This list pops up and you can actually see it and see what to do with it. So to conclude today, replanning and repreparing is an effort. It takes time and it takes energy. And it needs to take more time than you probably even think about. It's easy to say, the default was this, we did this before, we'll just go back to what we did. Well, everything is different. Many things are different. So take the energy and time to plan and to re-prepare. Secondly, the default setting is not very effective. If you wait, you fail. So the default is easy to say, well, I'll just kind of deal with it when it comes. No, plan now so that when you have the opportunity to recover and repair, replan, to get back to normal, you're ready and prepared for that. It's better to have a process and a method, and hopefully this provides you with at least a few steps in that process to allow you to really have some real good thought in advance of going back to normal. And then hopefully these pieces in order will actually allow you to be able to grow during crisis. True North Partners, Key Process Innovations, and Perkins & Company, all three of us would be delighted to help you with your efforts in pre-planning and pre-preparing for this recovery. It's been a pleasure really to work with these two and to see how we can functionally work together as well. It's been a lot of fun. And we'll have some contact information for you on the website. We'll also have the webinars. They are recorded and they will be available. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Don to facilitate the questions, and we'll see where we go from here. Thank you.
Very good, Scott. Thank you. Well done, as always. We do have a number of questions coming in, so let me start with the first one. So one of our attendees asked, he said, right now, there's no way I'm looking 3 to 5 years. I'm thinking next week, at most next month. How would you suggest that we effectively manage the crisis in crisis mode as opposed to looking 3 to 5 years out?
Well, I'm anticipating, that's a great question. And I would anticipate that a lot of the in the moment sort of work has been done, with the exception of how do I bring my employees back safely and securely into the business environment. So no doubt that has to be dealt with and with specifics. We have several clients that have maps on the floors, ways that people stay the six feet apart. They have clearly defined sort of actions to take to make sure that employees are safe and so forth. They also have communications with regard to employees and they're feeling scared and nervous about the environment. And so there are ways to actually handle those. I think what I'd say is that it's really critical to do both. If you do just the immediate piece today, you'll have an immediate sort of action plan. But if you forget thinking forward and how things have changed and so forth, you're going to be trying to put a square peg in a round hole, and it's not going to work because things have changed that much. So that's how I would respond to it. Julie, do you have any other thoughts on that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. yeah, it's a balancing act between dealing with the crisis and things that are coming up on a day-to-day basis, while also trying to plan for the future. But I'm not sure who asked that question. I'd say there's a lot of CEOs, owners, presidents that are listening to this, and they recognize that constant tug between the urgent and the important. But we've really got to make time for those important things, and that's the strategic planning and being able to look further out and what do you need to do and what do you need to shift to right now. So I agree with your
Makes
answer.
sense. Now we have another question. Said, if I cut my business back 60%, I have no business unless I blow it up and start over. Is that what you're suggesting?
No, in the case where a business goes back 90%, 60% is a pretty good outcome. I think that's, for restaurants, in some cases, that's what they're looking at as a significant blow up. And how do you get back to profitability at a 60% sort of revenue level? No, I'm suggesting that the opportunities, I think Julie's presentation last week was excellent with regard to looking for ways and places where you can expand and improve both efficiency-wise and kind of the cost structure, but also looking for ways to expand in your marketplace through various initiatives to reach out and find new markets, find new opportunities, and frankly, to bring back old previous customers that you lost by spending time contacting them and just saying, hey, how you doing and how can I help you? And not necessarily looking for work from them, but specifically just being connected with them and staying connected. I think that's a great point of that. No, I would say my desire is to go from 100% to 150%. So I'm looking at how do you actually find ways and strategies to move forward in a way that actually allows you to excel during this time, not decline.
Yeah, and I would just add just a little bit to that. And I just think, what would it take for us to be able to be successful at 60% or whatever that is, and put your team together and say, what's it going to take? What do we need to do differently in order to be able to make that happen? And I think if you can get everybody focused on that, I'm sure you can have that outcome where you can be successful at whatever that percentage ends up being.
For sure.
Very good. Another question, Scott, just asking about the documentation that I think that you mentioned is so valuable, which makes perfect sense. How do you avoid not being able to use, you touched on this a little bit, but you document maybe what's working, what's not working, what you learned through this COVID-19 crisis. How would you suggest, or what do businesses do in terms of a system to catalog documentation and access it later?
It's a great question. I think that, first of all, I believe in bulleted documentation. Narratives don't work. People can't find things, can't figure things out that way. I would actually begin by building a structure of communication or a structure of catalog that's not, again, we're not talking depth and breadth here. This isn't volumes. This is about building a sheet of bullets for employees, for systems, for processes, for technology, for just kind of the core pieces. What would you do the same? What would you do different? What would you actually think differently about next time? Keep it simple, really simple, but make sure that it is covering the primary areas that's critical for that particular organization.
Makes sense. Maybe just to follow on to that with that documentation, what would you suggest would be the best practice in terms of sharing that documentation with employees, with your leadership team, and making sure that what you have learned or what the team has learned is shared by the organization?
It's a great question. I would actually turn that around a little bit and say, how can you bring your organization, your leadership team together to use their insights and their perspectives to actually craft and create that list and that documentation? Because again, there are so many perspectives. Let's say, for example, that you have a leadership team of 10 people. It's almost exponential in the sense of all the input that they can provide. I would document it, but I would then also prioritize how important is this particular piece of information for my success in the future. And that prioritization process is relatively simple and fairly quick. But again, I think I would take your leadership team specifically, maybe your key organizational people managers down the line, and use their input to say what worked really well, what didn't work so well. And then I think you can structure it in a way that you can prioritize it. This is really important. This is moderately important. This is not so important.
Very helpful. Another item, you mentioned about being positive and being upbeat with your team to continue to reward and recognize them for their contributions. What would you suggest as the best way to measure the, I guess, tenor or the level of satisfaction with your team as you continue to coach and develop your team through this process?
There are a variety of ways to formally measure it, employee surveys and so forth. I'm not really certain that that would be the right thing at this point, but what I would say is that getting that informal feedback, and sometimes it's just anecdotal, that somebody writes an email and said, thank you for saying something to me, that was really meaningful. I think that you're going to get a lot more feedback, and I would even ask for it. Anything else that we can do to make your life even better? They're going to say, well, we really appreciated you doing this and this and this. That was just terrific. So I think at some level, this is organic. It's base level. It's person to person, and I think again, the feedback and the information, even the request, is really that relational one-on-one sort of dialogue. Would be my take on that.
Okay. One other, you mentioned replan and reprepare as part of the process. What should the frequency of replanning and repreparing be so that you don't overplan and lack direction?
It's a great question. I think this is a unique time because invariably a lot, and I don't have a percentage, I would guess that it's probably greater than 30% have had a major shift in their organization, something that's maybe permanently changed. Maybe it's less than that, maybe more than that, but intuitively, I'd say it's a larger percentage than we realize. And I think when there's a major shift like we're having today, that's the time to kind of look at it from a holistic perspective. We typically do a front-end work on strategic planning and assessment, and then the here and the there, the strategic piece with most every engagement that we work with. But then we will look at it again on an annual basis to say, has anything major changed? If it hasn't changed, then what are the key initiatives that we need to drive forward in the second phase or the second year to kind of move this toward the outcomes that we're looking for, that vision of the future? What does that look like? So I would say your strategic question or your strategic vision is probably not going to change more than every 3 to 5 years. Your annual changes are going to be more in the what do we do to get where we're trying to go, and that's going to be our annual review. Sometimes we do some cases where it's a 6-month sort of review if there's a lot of change.
Okay.
John, I had a
Then
question.
go ahead, Julie, I'm sorry.
No, I had another question come in. I just wanted to ask. What do you say to the owners and managers that are listening to this and saying, there's no way I can take any time off right now. There's just no way. Recognizing that I think that everyone needs a little bit of time after kind of coming through that, unless of course you've been at home, but that's probably not who we're talking to right now. So what do you say to that person? I got an email from one of my clients that said there's really no opportunity for me to rest until this is for real rest until this is behind me. So what would you say?
Well, I would say you're only good as the energy that you bring to it, and recharging is different for every person. I would say that even if it's a one afternoon to play golf or to go sit by the lake and stare at the stars or whatever it may be, it's going to be personal, but it's going to be what is it that actually recharges you? And again, I would say that I know everybody's putting in tons of hours, but the question is, how do you actually give the best that you have? And I think the best you have is when you're rested, when your mind is fresh, when you actually feel like things are positive, upbeat. So it may not take much time, but I would say any little time that you actually take is going to come back in spades with regard to the value and the quality of the thoughts that you have put back into it.
Great.
Scott, you also mentioned, came in just about restructuring the workplace to accommodate the COVID-19 crisis and what that might look like in terms of organizational alignment, communications, employee morale. What would be the process to help a business go through and determine what accommodations are necessary to accommodate the COVID-19 CDC requirements?
Well, Don, that's webinar 4, 5, and 6. It's the process itself is fairly involved, and I mean it strings some of the pieces we've talked about here with regard to kind of where you're going, what needs to be fixed, and how do you wrestle with that stuff. But it actually is also now looking at some more systemic sort of pieces of the organization. I think to some extent your market focus, your product service offerings. Again, if you're expanding or contracting or expanding, a lot of the strategic sort of questions play into, what pieces you actually have to wrestle with.
Okay.
I would love to answer the question in 2 minutes. It's impossible.
It is. Another kind of related question, you talked about strategy. Is it appropriate or necessary for businesses to go back now and revisit their 3-year strategy as part of their process of coming out of this stronger?
When your business changes dramatically, I think you absolutely have to think that strategy may be one of the first things you're going to change. Again, just taking the restaurant industry alone, I don't think it's ever going to be what it was before. I mean, it may get close to it, but even 6-foot separation, I think some of those things may in fact stay in place, maybe permanently, who knows? But that changes a whole lot of things. When you have a floor plan that's 5,000 square feet or 3,000 square feet or whatever, and you are now asked to basically take it in half, changes your model. So you actually, it changes your revenue stream. So you have to be thinking strategically, how do I leverage that? And there's a whole lot of pieces to kind of wrestle with. How do you actually make that happen? But there are alternatives and solutions and advantages and limitations of each of those that you can actually work through and come to conclusion of these are the things we're going to have to do. These are the things we can't do. And then come back, I think, all the way to the financials to say, how does this impact my profitability, my cost structure, my revenue stream? And begin to look at the puzzle from a financial standpoint and say, is it doable? And remarkably, some people can actually reduce their business by half and become more profitable. I mean, it changes labor force, it changes processes and systems, it takes new technologies, different things to make it happen. But again, this is unique time in terms of strategy review. I would say generally in a relatively stable environment, your strategies are not going to change a lot unless you have some significant impact in your own marketplace. And I don't like changing strategies very often, but when there's something that changes it for you, you better be nimble and looking at what do you do about it.
Mm-hmm. Just a question that came up from my standpoint. When you look at some of these, you mentioned it in your remarks earlier that some businesses may need to modify their business model because of competition. Their competition's business model changed, so they're going to be more predatory and trying to impede and take market share from you. What do you suggest that the leadership team do to become aware of what's happening with competition and try to protect their relationships with their clients and protect their business model so they're not finding themselves unprepared?
That's another difficult question, good question. However, what I find is we do a business assessment summary, which is a tool that actually identifies strengths and weaknesses in an organization. And invariably, the lowest category of almost every assessment that we have and that we run is knowledge about my competitor and knowledge about what they're doing and how effective they are in doing what they do. And I would say in many cases, you can have your eyes closed and probably do okay in some cases, in some situations. But again, especially in this time when people are saying, hey, my marketplace that I had is gone. if I'm going to survive, I'm going to have to find a new location or a new way of going to market. They may actually drop right into your marketplace and make that happen. I mean, even you think about teleconferencing and what that's done to the world in terms of how you go to market. Those things all have impact in terms of your opportunity to compete. How do you actually find out about it? I think you just have to have your eyes and ears open. I think you have to be looking at certainly your information sources and see what you can find there. But again, talking to commercial bankers, talk to people who are funding different initiatives and things is a way to find that. Other consultants, you folks would be a great resource to say, hey, what do you know about this company or that company? And I think, again, reaching out, again, the question is, what's the best use of time? That's, during some of this time, that may be one of the better uses of time, is to see who's competing.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add
Julie,
something?
anything to add?
Yeah, I have just like a slightly different take on that. And I think that if you go back to your customers and talk to them and find out what is it they like doing business, why do they like doing business with you? What are those things that they value the most? I think what you're going to find out is it's not necessarily the product as much as it's the relationships, it's the service, all these tangential parts of it. And so I think if you can capture that, understand that, and continue to market what you're doing, but in a way that is kind of highlighting the value that your customers see, you might not have to spend too much time worrying about your competitors because you're actually focusing more on the customer and servicing the customer. So
I like that.
My suggestion is get a hold of your customers. If you're not comfortable making those calls, because they can be a little bit uncomfortable, ask me. I've worked with a lot of different companies doing those types of projects, and we can figure it out and definitely start changing your language so that your customers are, so you can communicate in a way that they can really see your value.
Very good. I think that's all of our questions. Anything that you guys, Julie, any questions for Scott or?
We have time for another question. I think we do a couple more minutes. I just, one thing that you mentioned in your presentation, Scott, that I have heard a number of times is this companies that have been resistant to having people work from home to this kind of transition of, okay, they're comfortable working, now they're okay. And I just was wondering if the three of us maybe could have a quick conversation about why do you think that shifted, and what is it that shifted to allow that mindset to change? Either it's changed or the employee wants to continue to work from home and the owners or presidents don't want them to. So what do you think, I guess is a two-part question. Where do you see that shift coming from? And
I think you're right. The employees totally want to have that freedom to work from home. And I think owners typically say, well, I can't manage them if they're at home, or I can't make sure that they're putting in a full day's work. It's a trust issue to a great extent. And I think that that is the issue that creates that tension, if you will. I would say that what has happened and occurred is that the owners were forced to have their people work from home. And what they found is a good portion of them worked really, really well. A portion of them worked okay, and then a portion of them didn't work well at all. So in the case of this company that I'm working with, it's likely that they'll end up with a portion at home, a portion that's maybe somewhere in between, and a portion that has to work at the office. So I think it's precipitated by fear, and I would say that to a great extent, providing the boundaries and the methods to make that happen, and then watching it play out and actually addressing the real issues rather than the anticipated issues is the way to address it.
Julie, actually, I've thought about that a little bit just recently. I would characterize it in a couple of ways. Number one is I believe call a business paradigm. Our business times have changed. What I mean by that is the paradigm previously is that relationships are built by being face-to-face. That interpersonal contact is critical to establishing those relationships, especially where it's a service delivery, where communication, the face-to-face interaction is critical. So the paradigm that's changed, I think, is in addition to the business paradigm, is what I call a social paradigm. Now it's more socially acceptable to have business meetings virtually, webinars, Zoom, Skype, GoToMeeting, et cetera. Those platforms are now are more readily acceptable to the individuals. And all of a sudden, because of that change and because of the inability to meet in person, this other medium that we've identified as being effective is also more efficient. So businesses are looking at it from an efficiency standpoint and say, that's interesting.
Yeah,
The individuals that we were concerned about not being productive are actually more productive than we thought.
sure.
Number two, our clients are much more adept at accepting this new way of doing business. So that works. And that, so because of these kind of fundamental shifts in the way that we do business and the acceptiveness and also the change in the expectations, that has now made this business model, I think, more of a permanent component of the way that we do business going forward.
And I just want to throw one thing in that I was reading a post recently from a business owner that she's trying to bring everybody back and people don't want to come back, right? And her comment was, there were some inefficiencies that I saw during this time, and that's why she wants to bring everybody back to the office. I think this was a professional services firm. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about the comment, and my response would be, so if you're having that question is coming up as a business owner, I think that if you found inefficiencies and things that weren't working, I think you need to put the responsibility, you can go back to the employees and say, this is what I saw, these are my concerns, how do you think that you can mitigate them? Because my inclination is to bring everybody back to the office, and kind of don't put all that on your shoulders, but share that burden with your employees, and so that everyone's got some stake in kind of solving whatever those things were.
Yeah. And the final component, which I think may be the obvious, is the process of delivering the service or the product needs to change to accommodate the new condition.
Yeah.
And what we're finding is that those changes actually are not that difficult to develop and implement, and people are accepting them. Because recently with Perkins and Company, by example, we did a survey, try to get a sense of how many people are ready to come back, when they're ready to come back, how many days a week that they would like to work in the office, and how many people actually are not willing to come back yet. So we got a pretty good sense of what that disparity is. It was interesting. Probably 25% of the individuals aren't ready to come back. Of the individuals that are ready to come back, about 35% are willing to work 1 to 2 days a week in the office, and then the balance outside the office. So it's a fundamental shift in the way that we do business.
Yeah, for sure.
So fun stuff.
Did you want to bring this back up? If anybody has any additional questions here, this is probably the time. Otherwise, we are probably at the end, huh?
If we had just, I think we have a minute, just if I could summarize on the section from the webinar. Number one, if in the event that the current attendees weren't able to attend, just a couple takeaways as I've thought about it and trying to pull this all together, is number one, we look at crisis we are in crisis management. Part of the thing that I was trying to present in the first session was saying, how do we move from crisis management to strategically positioning the business to come out from a financial standpoint? Because the general tendency for us to be in a crisis management is to focus on maintaining revenues and reducing expenses as quickly as you possibly can. That's a short-term knee-jerk reaction to the situation that an organization finds themselves. What I believe is even more important is to look big picture in terms of what we call the revenue drivers and the cost drivers, and evaluate your business model and see what the revenue looks like going forward, the composition of that revenue, then also the composition of your cost structure to see what's your true cash flow. Because remembering that cash flow is not profitability. So most businesses are still focused on maintaining profitability, looking the need to maintain operating cash and working capital levels. So we built that scenario planning, high growth, moderate growth, low growth type scenario planning to test the impact of changing the underlying assumptions is going to be very helpful in positioning the business to come out of this crisis stronger. Julie?
I'm back.
Did you want to summarize?
I'm sorry, yes. I'm sorry I got kicked off here. I just got back. But so last week we just kind of talked about things have changed, business models have changed, but opportunities have changed. And I definitely think that every business has an opportunity to look at how they're doing business and look for ways to improve efficiencies. And that can be through streamlining your flow, rearranging your processes, and also leveraging kind of the input that your employees are bringing, because some of them have been at home, they've been uncomfortable with the COVID and some of the risks that they're facing in the workplace, and they're much more interested in kind of coming up with ways to solve some of those challenges. So I think that you've got a re-engaged workforce that you can definitely take advantage of, and together you can figure out how you can service this market and how it can be, what those new opportunities are, and how you can actually meet some of the needs of your customers and some future customers. So I would just encourage everybody to look at how can you leverage these things in order to emerge from this much stronger.
Okay, Scott, we're at 1:30, so.
Yeah, so just as a conclusion here, again, it's been a delight to work with both of you, and for anybody that's looking at this webinar, watching this webinar, here's the contact information. We'll leave it up on the screen for a little bit. If you'd like to contact any one of us, we would be delighted to work with you and to help you, even have a brief conversation, half-hour conversation around your situation and some quick answers for you. We'd be delighted to do that as well. So with that, I think we're probably finished, huh?
Yeah, just one quick comment. You might have already said that, but there are links that I put in the chat to everybody on how to get the webinars, webinar 1 and 2, and that'll also be sent out with this presentation. It'll be sent out to all of you that attended this this webinar, and you'll be able to see the link to all 3 of the videos that'll be up on YouTube.
Thanks.
Very good. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon.
All right.
Okay.